palms are sweaty and I'm barely listening to last demands. I'm staring at the asphalt, wondering what's buried underneath. I'm wearing my badge, a vinyl sticker with big block letters adhering to my chest that tells your new friends I am a visitor here, I am not permanent, and the only thing keeping me dry is you seem so out of context in this gaudy apartment complex. A stranger with your door key, explaining that I'm just visiting, and I am finally seeing why I was the one worth leaving. DC sleeps alone tonight. You seem so out of context in this gaudy apartment complex. A stranger with your door key, explaining that I'm just visiting, and I am finally seeing why I was the one worth leaving. Why I was the one worth leaving. The district sleeps alone tonight after the bars turn out their lights and send me auto-swerving into the loneliest evening. And I am finally seeing why I was the one worth leaving. Why I was the one worth leaving. Why I was the one worth leaving. Why I was the one worth leaving.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Mixtape. Won't you be my neighbor? Not that you care, but my name's Mike Kelly, and we tonight have 4 exciting stories for you coming from across the Twin Cities, and even there's one from our neighbors in Canada. Just a couple of housekeeping things. We think now's the time. You probably take those chitlins and put them aside. Why don't you go grab yourself a nice tasty beverage, maybe some cheesy popcorn. I don't know, whatever you're into. And why don't you sit back and get ready for our first storyteller. You might remember her from season 6 of The Voice. She comes from a small little town in North Dakota. She loves sweet pickles, and currently she has 8.5 rolls of TP in her house. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Kat Perkins!
Hi, my name is Kat Perkins, and I'm a singer-songwriter from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I was on season 6 of a show called NBC's The Voice. I was a finalist, Team Adam. And I'm here today to talk about a story about a neighbor. And it has to do with The Voice, which is kind of fun. So I auditioned for season 6, and it was a very intense time. So flashback to the fall of 2013. And filming The Voice is a much different process than you see on television. There's a lot of pre-taping that goes on. There's a lot of different levels of auditioning. So I was passing the first rounds of the first part of the audition before the blind auditions. And people were getting eliminated every single day. And we stayed in a hotel. So as many as friends as you make, and make fast friends in this instance, filming a reality show, sometimes they disappear the next day because they get eliminated or they're no longer needed to film the season. So fast forward to about week 3 or 4 of the process for me, and I got put in a hotel room next to another girl singer, country singer actually, and she sang all the time. Like all the time. She sang morning, noon, night, during the night, you name it. Now, because I had already spent a month on the show, I knew that there was a lot of intimidation tactics being used and people being mean to one another, and you're in direct competition with all these other singers, right? So there's many tools that people would use in their toolbox, whether they were on the up and up side or, not very nice. So because I encountered a lot of these people, I started to think that maybe my new neighbor was singing constantly to intimidate me or to make me mad or to, just kind of let her space be known that this is who she is and she's an amazing singer. Now, granted, she was an amazing singer, right? She's on season 6 of The Voice. So finally, one night, I had sort of had it. I was trying to sleep. I was trying to get my rest, and she was just singing, and right through the door of this adjoining room. And so I went over there and I knocked, and I was about to tell her that, she's being really loud, and I would love it if I could get some peace and some sleep. But when she opened the door, she was just this beautiful, gorgeous, amazing singer, just somebody that had a lot of drive, just like I did, right? This is why I was also on the show, because I persevered through a lot of things throughout my life and was persevering through this process of auditioning for The Voice, a reality show, and competing. And my heart just kind of sank into my stomach, and my feelings changed immediately, because I realized that it wasn't an intimidation tactic. She wasn't one of those that was being mean, and she wasn't one of those that was trying to, use her powers against me in order to, win or, be a better competitor in the game. I realized right away that she was just who she was, and a beautiful, gorgeous, amazing singer. So I guess the moral of my story is sometimes things aren't as they seem. And sometimes we need to be motivated and be pushed outside of our comfort zone by our neighbor, by our very talented neighbors in this case. Her and I are friends to this day, and truly, truly, she helped me change my mindset and really helped inspire me to be a great singer and to use my voice whenever I wanted and whenever I should. And I hope that you all can find inspiration in your beautiful neighbors as well. I was a huge fan of Mr. Rogers growing up. That's how I grew up, watching him every day. And, he always said, look for the helpers, right? And sometimes you don't perceive your neighbor as a helper, but I'm telling you, you can find the helper in all of your neighbors. So do that. And won't you be my neighbor?
next storyteller comes to us from our neighbor to the north, currently living in a little town called Montreal. Do you know where Montreal is? Anyway, she's been featured on the Moth's Radio Hour, CBC Radio 1's Wiretap, and the Public Radio Remix. She's a favorite mixtape storyteller. She loves sage green, and currently she has 8 rolls of toilet paper in her house. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Taylor Tower.
Hi Mixtape, thanks for having me. This is my story. Joel and I sat at his bedroom window spying on the neighbors. It was incredibly bright and sunny, and he told me his mom said you can't look directly at the sun. I asked him why, and he said he didn't know, just that she'd caught him doing it once and told him to stop. We looked at each other, put a hand up over our eyes, and turned our heads towards the window. On the count of 3, we lifted a finger and peeked through. My vision whited out, and I squeezed my eyes shut again. The orb of the sun shined on the backs of my eyelids. We sat there silently for a while, sharing something bad and dangerous. Joel was my first friend and lived 2 doors down from me. We met when we were 3. I'd just moved into the neighborhood and I was busy in my driveway making perfume. The recipe was simple. I'd just go around my block and I'd pick tulips and daffodils from the neighbors' yards, toss them into a bowl of water. The trick was you had to stir them fast enough to get the smell out. Suddenly, a shadow darkened my flowers swirling in the water. I looked up, and there he was. I was impressed by his bravery in crossing the threshold from the safety of the sidewalk into a stranger's driveway. "Do you want to play with me?" he asked. "Okay," and I followed him to his house. Your first friend is a passport to an exotic new land. Joel had a mom, a dad, and 2 teenage brothers, although I only caught fleeting glimpses of them as they closed their bedroom doors. His house was always very hot, which amplified the alien potpourri of his family, the unfamiliar cooked food, the chalky detergent, sweat. Joel and I spent all of our time in his 2nd-story bedroom. His dad was a cop, and he let us play with his handcuffs and bulletproof vests. When Joel got a police uniform costume, he told me he didn't know how to do the buttons. And I just learned how to do buttons the week before, so I showed him how to coax the little plastic circles through the slits with my chubby fingers. He took over and fastened a few, with his tongue out in serious concentration. But the short walk from his front door to his bedroom was precarious. One time I came over and his dad let me in, and I saw Joel on the couch with his mom, and she was giving him a shot with a needle. I froze in terror, and he looked at me and was like, "I have diabetes." I had no idea what that was, so I was still super worried that she was going to give me a shot. Honestly, I was intimidated by his mother. She was this wispy, thin little thing. Everything about her was thin. Her lips, her nose, her eyebrows. She wasn't warm and funny like my mom. She barely spoke at all. And I dreaded when she would make us lunch. It was always the same thing, and I was too afraid to tell her I hated jelly sandwiches. It's like the peanut butter is the only viable part of that sandwich, and you're taking that out. So we'd sit at the kitchen table, and the air was stuffy and hot, and the sweet smell of grape jelly pierced my nose as my fingers sunk into the soft white bread. I'd make an excuse and just go home. And so when Joel and I started kindergarten, he was in a different classroom. He stopped coming to the driveway to ask me to play. And when I did see him, he was racing down the block on his bike. I couldn't ride without training wheels, and I just couldn't keep up. I thought, if only I could ride a two-wheeler, Joel and I could be best friends again. We'd explore parts of the neighborhood we'd never seen before. I had a secondhand banana seat bike from the 1970s. And the training wheels didn't even fit right. They hovered an inch off the ground. My toes could barely reach the pedals, and if I even managed to get going, the ride was this stomach churning sway from right to left. But one day, I suited up in my neon pink knee pads, matching elbow pads and helmet, and I told my mom, take off the training wheels. I hoisted myself up onto the seat and started swatting at the pedals with my pointed toes. The front wheel started slithering back and forth like a snake, and the handlebars slid out of my grasp. My legs got all tangled up, and the sidewalk leapt up and smacked me in the face. I rolled over and looked up. I'd crashed in front of Joel's house. As I got to my feet, I noticed that a chunk of neon pink plastic scraped off my knee pad and stuck to the gray sidewalk. It wasn't long after that Joel moved away. I mean, all I remember is that one day he was gone and I didn't get to say goodbye. But the worst part was, he never saw me ride a two-wheeler. I'd gotten a bike for my birthday, one that fit me, and I figured out how to ride it. I mean, I even did some daredevil stunts. My favorite was to ride down a hill super fast and then bail into the neighbor's fluffy lawn as my bike rode on without me. 7 years later, I was in 8th grade science class when a new kid came in the door. His name was Joel. My whole middle school experience was defined by this tightness in my chest. And suddenly, I felt light. The minute the bell rang for recess, I followed him out the door. And I could tell it was him because his eyes were the same. He was at the back of the school with a few other kids, and I was just convinced that he was going to be as thrilled as I was that we had found each other. These keepsakes from a simpler time. Hi, Joel! It probably came out way too loud. He stared at me. The minutes ticked by in slow motion. We used to play together when we were little. You were my neighbor. I'm Taylor. He seemed to smile out of politeness. He looked uncomfortable. He did not recognize me. The tightness in my chest came back. On my walk home from school, I stopped in front of his old house. And there, his bedroom window with the same dusty blue siding and the Japanese maple leaves rustling against the glass. And behind it, suspended in time, there were two little kids who only needed each other. And now I'm on the other side of the continent, but I can revisit that window and my first friend Joel anytime I want. All I have to do is close my eyes and summon that bright orb on the backs of my eyelids. Thank you.
Tonight you're mine completely. You give your love so sweetly. Tonight the light of love is in your eyes. But will you love me tomorrow? Is this a lasting treasure or just a moment's pleasure? Can I believe the magic of your sight? Will you still love me tomorrow? Tonight with words unspoken, you say that I'm the only one. But will my heart be broken when the night meets the morning sun? I'd like to know that your love is a love I can be sure of. So tell me now, and I won't ask again. Will you still love me tomorrow? Will you still love me tomorrow?
Our next mixtaper is a Minneapolis-based stand-up comic with a heart of gold. She appeared in 2019's Limestone Comedy Festival, Boston's Women in Comedy Festival, and was also featured in the Best of Fest show at the 10,000 Laughs Comedy Festival. She's a former member and writer at the Brave New Workshop. Now Ellie is a super fun mom, a mediocre wife, and an all-around delight. Her favorite color is baby blue. She loves mashed potatoes, and she's down to 4 rolls of TP in the house. So ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Ellie Hino.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ellie. I am on my bathroom floor right now. Excuse me. So my story is less of a story and more of like an ode to Orchard Drive. I grew up in one house for my entire childhood, from 1978 to 1996. For 18 years, I lived in that little yellow ranch-style house on Orchard Drive. And then again, I lived there when I dropped out of college, but that doesn't sound as pure, so we'll just leave that part out. Our yellow house was built in the 50s, and there was one of those black wrought iron eagles above the garage door. big picture window in front, nice tree in the yard, the kind with a lot of aphids and like the really tiny leaves that make raking extra annoying. Inside the yellow house were my parents, Henry and Pat, my 2 older brothers, and me. Of course, I'm a little sister. The summer evenings were spent playing with all the other neighborhood kids. Idyllic, you know. Ghost in the Graveyard was a crowd fave, though I honestly don't think I ever understood the rules. I just know it had to be a little bit dark outside and everyone pretended to be really scared. All the houses on Orchard Drive were kind of similar, built in the 50s, nice and well maintained, but like not fancy or huge. Lawns were green and mowed, speckled with dandelions, idyllically imperfect. Next door was the Rudies. They had cable. Jenny was younger than me, but she was my playmate because the neighborhood was mostly dumb boys. Jenny and I would hang from her maple tree branch with our knees. It was like the perfect branch, you guys. Perfect height, perfect width. It was the perfect climbing branch. I wish you could see it. And then Kim, Jenny's older sister, was very cool and pretty and had like all the charm bracelets. And I remember standing on their very black asphalt driveway. That shit was like lava in the summer and bare feet. But I have this like tiny specific memory of Kim telling me about an episode of The Young and the Restless she had seen where Victor and Nikki did this. And I was like, what's this? And she was like, you don't know what this is? I was like, no, what is this? And she was like, this is sex. And I was like, oh, I get it. But like, I definitely didn't get it. Across the street were the Linos. Oh yeah, there's no story here, you guys. I'm just gonna tell you about all of my neighbors. So I'm just gonna go through and just tell you about them. So anyway, the Linos were in the White House with the sloping driveway. Mary Lino was kind of like a matriarch of the street. She had short red hair. She was older, but not old. Used to be a nurse, kind of like no nonsense, but very caring. She was good friends with my mom, Pat. They had grown kids who were always nice to us. Brian Lino ran the IGA grocery store down the road. I have a picture of me, like I was in middle school and I'm in like a stonewashed jean jacket and I'm awkwardly sitting on his lap. He's dressed up like the Easter Bunny at the grocery store and the Easter Bunny's face is just a white paper plate with holes cut in it and kind of crudely drawn whiskers. Terrifying. His sister, Kelly Lino, became a school principal. Good for her, right? Her hair was the prettiest, just very red, very long, very wavy, thick, good hair. And then there were all the little boys of Orchard Drive. So many boys. The Ulanskis, the Jensens, the Popes, the Sainsburys. They were all like my age. And one time we found a dead crow and buried it next to a phone pole. And then later we like dug it back up. It was awesome. And then in middle school, I pretended like I didn't know any of them because I was scared that they would like tell people that I used to do shit like dig up dead crows. Then down the street, the Zuberbeers had the best last name. Heather was a teenager and I seriously thought she was just the greatest. She would babysit me and she was so nice. Her brother Mike was friends with my oldest brother and he babysat us littler kids once. And he let us watch the beginning of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So like Heather was better at babysitting, I guess. And I remember being kind of afraid of her dad, Mr. Zuberbeer, because he had a beard. No other reason. He was probably very nice. Next door to them was Cloppy. That's right, her name was Cloppy. She was the most delightful old lady you can imagine. She looked like a smiling little, like, wrinkled up apple doll, just like laughing and giggling all the time with like gray curly hair. Her full name was Henrietta Clopidol, and she used to cook for the cowboys. And I wish that I could like explain what that meant, but that's all I know. She said she cooked for the cowboys, and I always imagined that meant like next to a covered wagon during the gold rush, which makes sense because she was like 147 years old. Her house was totally different than all the rest on Orchard Drive. It was like set back a little, and it was made of stones, like a very fairy tale cottage vibe, you know. Her husband, Einar, built it himself in the 30s, literally breaking his back in the process. He was okay, but he walked hunched over with a cane, which he probably also made himself, and he was pretty much always in his recliner. He had this tall rectangular tin full of sugar cubes, and whenever us neighborhood kids would visit him, he would give us sugar cubes, just like as many as we wanted. So we obviously spent a lot of time there. And I remember baking cookies with Cloppy. Oh, I have a kid of my own now. He's 4. And I was probably like about his age. I remember standing on a chair at her wooden counter, rolling out the dough, flour floating through the sunbeams around her little giggling face. She was like a total trickster too. Like she had one of those super old-timey cans where the snake would pop out on a spring when you opened it, and she would like pinch and tickle and joke around. And apparently one time after a big neighborhood block party, she let my dad, Henry Hino, give her a ride home in a red radio flyer wagon. And I'm sure you guys are wondering, like, where is this all going, Ellie? Nowhere, you guys. It's not going anywhere at all. This is just some straight up stream of consciousness, like Joyce Carol Oates shit. So let's just wrap it up, okay? So Orchard Drive, it was just a good place full of good people, and it was formative of who I am today. Now I'm a mom to a wild 4-year-old boy, and I'm married to a wonderful man with a beard. We live in a perfectly hideous split-level house in the suburbs. When my Bert was a baby, we went house hunting because I wanted him to have his own Orchard Drive. I was more than hesitant to live in the burbs, but when we drove down Idaho Avenue for the first time, the trees seemed familiar, and the kids were yelling, and an old lady waved at us from her mailbox, and I just knew we were home. Now, that old lady who waved to us did not turn out to be a Cloppy by any means. She's never invited Bert over to bake cookies. She asks us things like, "Are you ever going to cut down your maple tree? It drops too many leaves in our yard." But I'm thinking, like, maybe if we stay in this house long enough, I can be the Cloppy. Guys, that was a very saccharine story, but maybe that's what we need right now. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.
Welcome back. Our final mixtaper is no stranger to us. Some of you might call him the Silverfish Man. I would rather call him the director, producer, and creator of Theater People. Oh, look at that. Here we go. He loves the colors black and white. He likes a nice whiskey. And he's fully stocked up on toilet paper. So ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for our friend, Matthew G. Anderson. Just so everyone's aware, if you're feeling generous tonight and you want to give a donation for all the awesome work that you saw, please check out in the links below. We're donating anything that wants to come into Wayward to Interact Center for the Arts tonight. They're a wonderful organization, and in this really difficult time, like most artists and most theaters, they're struggling. So we're doing our part to also help bolster them. So please, if you are looking to donate a few ducats tonight, please consider giving to Interact Center for the Artists. Thank you.
Good evening. When Wayward Theater asked me to do this virtual version of their mixtape storytelling showcase, I was really excited. I've had the opportunity to do a few of them in the past in person, and they've always been really fun. And then as I started working on it, I realized it's actually really hard to do any kind of creative work right now. And so, as I usually do when I face a creative challenge, I just kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And now it's coming up on 3:30 on the night that I said I would have it to them, and I'm all set. I have reconfigured the story a little bit to be a little bit more of a bedtime story. Have to keep it down a little bit. My wife is sleeping in the other room. But I hope that you'll pull up a drink or a pillow or whatever brings you comfort. And enjoy Won't You Be My Neighbor? A long time ago, in the year 2005, a not-so-young screenwriter moved from Minnesota to Los Angeles to seek his fortune. His first apartment was in Brentwood, a magical place famous for the O.J. Simpson murders and also for a really top-notch farmer's market on Tuesdays. One day, a few weeks after he'd moved there, the screenwriter had walked down to the Starbucks that looked like a little ski chalet, because in Brentwood even Starbucks was just a little better. And as he was standing in line waiting to order his $7 coffee, he noticed all the heads in the Starbucks turn in his direction, staring just over his shoulder. Very casually, he pretended to look at the bulletin board by the door, with the home-printed flyers for Krav Maga training, or a local pan flute recital, or Dutch lessons. And there behind him was Indiana Jones. His new neighbor was Harrison Ford. But this story isn't about Han Solo and the screenwriter's first LA apartment. It's about his fifth LA apartment. It's about Lorraine. It was nearly 7 years and 4 apartments later when the screenwriter traveled east across LA to the significantly less magical land of Koreatown. He needed a new place to live and had spotted a little studio just off Western that was renting for just under his $1,300 a month price limit. For a studio. In 2011. He found the modest but pleasant-looking building and rang the bell that said manager. As he waited, he looked around the neighborhood. It was nice. Among the duplexes and triplexes, there were still a few single-family homes, and there was a 24-hour convenience store half a block away for cigarettes and booze. Sure, the dilapidated 4-drawer dresser on its side on the corner opposite the building was a little down market, but hey, he thought to himself, maybe I could use a dresser. Just as he was assessing the street furniture for possible acquisition, the door to the apartment building opened and a squat, emphatic woman of indeterminate age peered up from behind a steel grate. "Yes," she said with a voice like a wet squeegee on a dry window. This was Lorraine. She was dressed in what the screenwriter would come to recognize as her business casual attire, a flannel floral nightgown that trailed along the ground, with 2 sturdy hobbit-like feet poking out from under the hem. She looked like Ruth Gordon in Rosemary's Baby, which was just what one hoped to find when apartment hunting. "I have an appointment to see the studio apartment," he said. She squinted at him as though this was the first she'd heard of it, and then finally said, "Got a job?" I do," he said. "I work for a box software company in El Segundo." "I don't know what that means." "Oh," he said, "it's software that comes in a box." Her face registered nothing. "For computers." "I don't have a computer," she said, as though he had suggested he might want to barter for rent. She eyeballed him for a moment, then opened the steel gate. "So you want an application?" she asked. Could I see the apartment first? With a beleaguered sigh, she turned and weebled off down the hallway, not looking back to see if he was following. All right, she said, seemingly to no one. You'll want it, though. The bathroom is in the closet. The apartment was actually quite nice. Not $1,300 in 2011 nice, but nice nonetheless. A little living area, a kitchen separated by a wall for that real apartment feel, and a bathroom that wasn't in, but rather through a large walk-in closet big enough for a desk. The screenwriter explored all this on his own, as Lorraine had been called away on a plumbing emergency, the hard plastic cordless phone that never left her hand bleeping as soon as she'd opened the door. She'd stormed off down the hall, shouting into the phone at the plumber, and leaving a stranger unsupervised in someone else's apartment. When he was finished looking around, the screenwriter took the application she'd left and went home to fill it out. There wasn't room for a dresser, it turned out, but by the time the screenwriter moved in a month later, the curb dresser was gone anyway, replaced by what appeared to be a very well-used toilet. There was no seat, but the white porcelain bowl and tank sat there on the boulevard as though part of a pilot program for open-air public lavatories. Like nice ride bikes or lime scooters, but for pooping. As he and a friend unloaded the rented U-Haul, the screenwriter got the first inkling that Lorraine might turn out to be a problem. Perched on the front stoop with a 4-pack of electric blue wine coolers, she didn't stop speaking for 3 hours. Sometimes she was on the cordless phone, but mostly she talked to them, making it clear over and over that she would not be assisting with the move. I'm stronger than I look, but if I did it for you, I'd have to do it for everyone. The screenwriter and his friend had, of course, never requested her help. Indeed, they'd been careful not to engage with her in any way. The one question the screenwriter had addressed to her had been, so, what's the situation with the toilet over there? In response, Lorraine had gazed across the street for a long, contemplative moment, before replying ominously, I wouldn't use it, and polishing off another wine cooler. The screenwriter had hung his hopes on the idea that once he'd moved in, he and Lorraine wouldn't see much of each other, and that turned out to be the case. Rent was paid to the building owner, Brad, online, and there were few maintenance issues, so the screenwriter and Lorraine crossed paths only rarely, and then only when the screenwriter didn't see her first. All things considered, it was a comfortable arrangement. But then, 4 months later, the screenwriter lost his job at the box software company. Everyone lost their job at the box software company. You see, it was 2011, and it turned out no one had bought box software since 1998. Losing his day job wouldn't have been such a problem, but the screenwriter had also failed to make nearly any money screenwriting. The closest he'd come to a big sale being a call from his managers that they'd described as a good news, bad news proposition. The good news was a named star was interested in one of his scripts. The bad news was Stone Cold Steve Austin was not, as they put it, Robert De Niro. It had come to nothing in the end anyway, and the fact was the screenwriter was ready to leave Los Angeles. What had started as a year or two had turned into 7, and he found himself longing to return to the Midwest, where he was selling just as many film scripts, and the rents were far more reasonable. There was only one problem. He still had 8 months left on his lease in Koreatown. The day after the box software company closed its doors, the screenwriter made his way to Lorraine's apartment on the 2nd floor, a place that, until then, he'd successfully avoided. Through the door, he heard Lorraine loudly arguing with someone about an apparent maintenance issue. Hoping that if he caught her in the middle of something, he might be able to keep the trip quick, he knocked on the door. Almost immediately, Lorraine threw it open, mid-argument. Well, it worked for me this morning. He looked past her into the apartment, where she was quite clearly alone. Choosing to ignore all of this, he said, Lorraine, I have bad news. What? She said. Come in. With no graceful way to decline, he stepped inside. I'm sorry to bother you, he started. What do you know about TV? He processed it, for a moment, unsuccessfully. As in... She thrust a large remote control at him. I used to have a clicker for the TV and a clicker for the whatever, for the, what do they call it, the cable. And then my daughter gave me this for Christmas and says it works for both of them, and now I can't even turn one on. The screenwriter flattened himself against the wall by the door, trying not to look too closely around the dimly lit apartment that resembled what a food truck might look like if it exploded in an antique shop. Lorraine, I lost my job. What did you do? I worked for a software company? No, what did you do that they fired you for? The screenwriter explained that the company had closed, but she didn't seem to buy it. Well, your lease isn't up for another... how long? 8 months. I think I'm going to need to find someone to take it over for me. My shower needs new grout. Yeah? It's all moldy or whatever. Mildew. It's all mildewy. Our plumber was supposed to take care of it, but that guy is a piece of work, let me tell you. Yikes. If you regrout my shower, I'd pay you something. Not enough for rent, I'm not made of money, but if you do a good job, maybe that could be something you could do. For a living. Oh. I mean, if our plumber can stay in business the way he operates. The screenwriter politely declined and told her he would coordinate with the building's owners to find someone to take over his lease. He spent 20 minutes setting up her TV remote, and he left. There was no lack of interest in the little studio apartment. From the time the screenwriter posted it on Craigslist, the phone never stopped ringing. And people liked what they saw. He kept it in nice shape, separate kitchen, bathroom in the closet. Even the curb toilet had disappeared one day, only to be replaced a few days later by an old, cracked leather recliner, which, while still out of its element, was certainly aesthetically preferable. No, the problem with finding a new tenant wasn't the apartment or the neighborhood. It was Lorraine. Time and again he'd be on the verge of closing the deal, only to have Lorraine appear in the doorway, eating a Pyrex bowl of German potato salad, but somehow smelling of ramen, and begin her interview. Lorraine's interview questions ranged from the classic, "Do you have a job?" to the problematic, "What are you?" to the just plain bewildering, "What do they get for a hammock these days?" No matter which questions they got, no one ever submitted an application. The screenwriter first requested, then practically begged her to let him handle the process herself, but Lorraine insisted that she was the one who was going to have to live there, and she didn't want any serial killers moving in. So week in and week out, the screenwriter worked on his scripts, collected his unemployment, and kept the apartment showcase spotless for prospective tenants. And week in and week out, Lorraine put the cant in applicant. Finally, after nearly 2 months, he received a phone call that had exactly the element he'd been hoping for. Desperation. The young woman had just arrived in L.A. and needed a place immediately. She didn't want to get tied into anything too long-term at first, so the 6 months now remaining on the screenwriter's lease seemed ideal. Could she see the place today? Sensing the best chance he was going to get, the screenwriter leveled with her. After he'd set up the time and given her the address, he added, "I have to tell you, you're going to meet Lorraine. She's a character. But I promise, once you're here, you'll never see her." A week later, the screenwriter was packing all his belongings into the back of a Ford Focus in preparation for the long drive back to Minneapolis. The young woman had held up well under Lorraine's questioning. She said afterward that it was like talking to her great aunt and that she didn't think it would be a problem as long as she never had to see her or deal with her. Anything that didn't fit in the Ford Focus wasn't making the trip, which left the screenwriter with the classic final dilemma of how to dispose of a queen-sized mattress. He'd gotten it out of the apartment, but the dumpster out back was too full. He'd left it leaning against the fence back there as he'd loaded up the last of the boxes. Just then, like an answer to a prayer, a huge Green City waste disposal truck rolled past, half filled with oversized trash. He flagged it down and asked the driver if they had room for another mattress. "Sorry, man, if there's no pickup scheduled, we can't take it." The screenwriter asked if he had any suggestions, and the truck driver looked around the neighborhood, his eyes finally landing on the corner across the street, the corner from which the cracked leather recliner had just recently disappeared. Throw it over there. Somebody'll deal with it," The truck rumbled off, and the screenwriter walked back to the building. He hadn't seen Lorraine all afternoon, and he realized that some part of him was disappointed she wasn't there to send him off in her own inimitable style. He walked around to the dumpster in back of the building, and there, on the service door, he noticed a sheet of notebook paper taped to the door. Looking closer, he discovered the latest salvo in Lorraine's ongoing war with the plumber. It read, "Attention Merrill. Plumber. Pumbler. Plumber. Apartment 29. Don't leave. We'll be back in 10 to 15 minutes. I am the manager's. I'm at apartment 29. Don't leave if there's no answer, please. Wait. Or call other manager Brad. Bring snake for toilet. And snake." The screenwriter smiled, half affectionate, half relieved to be leaving. He retrieved his mattress, and as he struggled to drag it across the street, dodging cars, he suddenly remembered that time, just after he'd arrived in L.A., when he'd had coffee with Indiana Jones. Thank you. Good night.
Can't explain all these feelings that you're making me feel. My heart's in overdrive and you're behind the steering wheel. Touching you, touching me, touching you, oh, you're touching me. I believe in a thing called love. Just listen to the rhythm of my heart. There's a chance we can make it now. We'll be rocking till the sun goes down. I believe in a thing called love. Touching you, touching me, touching you, oh, you're touching me. I believe in a thing called love. Just listen to the rhythm of my heart. There's a chance we can make it now. We'll be rocking till the sun goes down. I believe in a thing called love. Listen to the rhythm of my heart. There's a chance we can make it now. We'll be rocking till the sun goes down. I believe in a thing called love.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's our show. I hope you had as much fun as I did. If you want to see more from Wayward, please hit us up on the old Instagrams, Facebooks, our Twitter snacks, and you can also check us out at our website at waywardtheater.org. Thank you very much and have a lovely, lovely evening. At least there's that. What, you're gonna play me out? I don't know what that means.